Hey dreamers, welcome to Back Then with Ben, your cozy spot for nostalgic bedtime tales. Tonight, we'll wander to a simpler time. Warm ovens, soft rain, and the comfort of a village bakery. Let's step back to a morning long ago. The village bakery, on a rainy morning, she would shuffle over, pull open the heavy latch, and slide out a tray of rolls, so perfect they looked like they'd been painted. The smell was intoxicating, a blend of toasted wheat, melted butter, and the faint caramel edge of sugar. The smell of baking bread began to drift from the kitchen, but it was different from the earlier, familiar scents. This was deeper, more earthy, the unmistakable tang of rye mingling with the warm bite of caraway seeds. It seemed to stir something in the air, and a few customers closed their eyes for a moment, letting the memory-laden aroma pull them backward in time. One of the farmers at the corner table whispered to his companion, "I haven't smelled that since my wedding day," and the other nodded, his expression unreadable. A child near the counter tilted her head and asked her mother why the bread smelled like Grandpa's stories. The man by the window didn't speak, but a faint softness settled over his features, as though each passing moment was carrying him further away from the present. "I remember," he said simply. "There was a festival in the village square that July. You were selling loaves like this for 2 pennies each." Mrs. Whitmore's brows lifted slightly, "And you bought 3. A faint smile ghosted across the man's face. "2 for me, and 1 for her." For a heartbeat, her eyes searched his, as if sifting through the fog of years for something half-remembered. Then her lips curved, though there was a wistfulness behind it. She had the bluest ribbon in her hair. Outside, a cart rattled past on the wet cobblestones, its wheels hissing softly in the rain. Inside, no one moved. The farmers at the corner table were still as statues, and even the child by the counter had gone quiet, sensing that something important, something rare, was unfolding. Mrs. Whitmore's fingers hovered above the tin for a moment before she picked it up. She turned it in her hands, and when she finally opened it, a faint scent rose into the air, not quite strong anymore, but still carrying that unmistakable blend of ground caraway and rye flour. Inside, wrapped in yellowed paper, was the corner of a very old loaf, long hardened into something like stone. She laughed softly, though the sound trembled. "It's a wonder you've kept it this long." The man nodded once. "Some things you keep because they remind you of what mattered. Some things because you hope one day you'll come back and find them again." The baker's smile deepened, but she said nothing. Outside, the rain kept falling, and inside the bakery, the smell of rye and caraway seemed to wrap itself around every person in the room, binding them together in that single, unhurried moment. For those who were there, it would be the kind of memory they might carry with them for the rest of their lives. A quiet afternoon when time seemed to fold in on itself, and the past stepped briefly into the present. "You came a long way for this bread," Mrs. Whitmore said finally, breaking the silence, her voice gentle, but edged with curiosity. He blinked, pulling his gaze back to her. "Not for the bread," he said quietly. "For the place." The stranger set the half-eaten slice of bread down on the counter, and rested his palms against the wood. "I was a boy the last time I stood here," he began. "It was the summer after my father passed. My mother, she didn't have much to give us, but on rainy mornings like this, she would save just enough coins to bring me here. Said it was important to start the day with something warm." A slow smile touched his lips. That was her way of making do. She said the red thread reminded her that nothing was ever truly broken, just mended in a way you could be proud of. Outside, the rain beat harder against the windows, the sound like a soft applause for the story unfolding. Mrs. Whitmore folded her arms across her apron, not to shield herself, but as if holding the memory close. He chuckled faintly, though it was the kind of laugh that didn't hide the ache underneath. Heavy enough, but mostly, "I think I just wanted to see if the bakery remembered me as much as I remembered it." Mrs. Whitmore moved slowly to the shelves behind her, selecting another loaf, this one golden and round, its crust dusted with a fine coat of flour. She set it on the counter next to the rye and said, "We remember more than you think. Faces change, years pass, but the walls, the ovens, the air itself, they keep things. You'd be surprised how much they hold." The man's gaze swept the room then, tracing the beams of the ceiling, the old brass bell above the door, the slight dip in the wooden floor where countless feet had walked over decades. "It feels the same," he said. "Even the sound of the rain is the same." The man picked up the slice of rye again and took another bite, slower this time, as though committing every detail to memory. And perhaps he was. The soft chew of the bread, the warmth of the oven, the murmur of voices around him, the faint creak of the sign outside swinging on its iron bracket. My mother would take my hand, and we'd walk through the wet streets, her coat brushing against my arm, the red thread in her pockets bright as berries. "My mother had this way," the man went on, "of turning everything into something special. If a loaf was warm, she'd say it was smiling at us. If the rain was heavy, she'd say it was the sky's way of reminding us to slow down. And when we came here, she'd breathe deep, close her eyes, and say, 'This is what home smells like.'" He took a slow sip of his coffee, the warmth seeping into him. "One morning, we came here, and it was raining just like today. She bought a loaf, rye, same as this, and then, before we left, she gave the other loaf she'd been saving for us to an old man outside who had no coat. I remember asking her why, when she didn't have much herself. And she said, 'Because someday you'll understand that sharing warmth matters more than keeping it.'" The rain at the windows deepened, drumming against the glass like the echo of that long-ago morning. The child at the counter swung his legs slowly, as if trying to hold onto the rhythm of the tale. From the counter, Mrs. Whitmore called gently, "Find what you were looking for. A pinch of this. A bit more if you like it sweeter. Don't rush the rising bread nose." No measurements in neat cups or spoons, just her instinct captured on paper. The idea came to him slowly, like the way the smell of fresh bread creeps into a room before you even notice you're breathing deeper. He kept one hand resting over the folded recipe in his coat, feeling its soft, worn edges as though it were a secret he wasn't quite ready to share. And yet, maybe this was the moment to let it out into the light again. The thought of baking that cinnamon loaf here, in the very bakery where he'd just rediscovered it, filled him with a quiet excitement. It wasn't a sharp, sudden burst of energy, but a gentle pull, like the way rain pulls you to the window without you realizing you've moved. The cinnamon sugar mixture was the last part, and as they spread it across the rolled-out dough, the air seemed to grow warmer still, the scent rich and familiar. Rolling it into a loaf felt like sealing the memory inside, ready to be released again when it baked. They set it in the oven, and the hum of the heat joined the rain's gentle percussion outside. Neither of them spoke much while they waited. They didn't need to. There's a kind of silence that isn't empty at all, but full, the way an old photograph is full even though it makes no sound. He took a bite, and the taste was exactly as he remembered. Warm, sweet, with just enough spice to linger. And in that moment, he felt something loosen inside him, something that had been wound tight for years. The past wasn't gone. It was here, alive in the present, folded into the bread, into the air, into the quiet company of someone who understood. The first bite seemed to dissolve the bakery around him, as though the walls, the rain, and even the hum of the oven melted into the edges of a dream. He wasn't in Mrs. Whitmore's kitchen anymore. He was standing in the warm glow of his childhood home, the one with the chipped blue tiles in the kitchen and the big oak table that always smelled faintly of polish and bread flour. The light streaming through the lace curtains was softer than sunlight. The sound of her hands working the dough was gentle and steady, a soft rhythm against the wooden board, like a heartbeat you didn't realize you'd been listening for. Every so often she'd look up and smile at him, that kind of smile that wasn't just on her lips, but in her eyes, as if she could see all of him, even the parts he didn't yet understand. He remembered sitting on the stool by the counter, swinging his legs, feeling the cool metal edge under his palms. Sometimes she would break off a small piece of dough and hand it to him, telling him to practice shaping it, even though she knew he'd eat it before he got very far. Outside, the same rain seemed to fall, or maybe it was a different rain, but it had the same sound, tapping softly against the window pane, slow and even. The house seemed to hold its breath in those moments, not out of tension, but because everything was exactly as it should be, and nothing needed to be said. Even the ticking clock in the hallway felt like part of the recipe, marking the spaces between each rise and knead. He could almost feel the texture of the old kitchen floor beneath his bare feet, the faint grit of flour that had escaped the counter dusting his toes. The loaf would be baking by now, and he remembered how the smell would grow richer until it filled not just the kitchen, but every hallway and room, curling around corners and drifting under doors. It was impossible not to follow it, impossible not to end up back in the kitchen, drawn in by something more than hunger. In this dream memory, his mother slid the loaf from the oven, her hands steady in their worn, quilted mitts. She'd place it on the table and let it rest, though he could never understand why they had to wait. "It's still becoming itself," she would say, as though bread was more than just food, as though it had a life and a story. and you had to give it time to finish speaking before you could cut into it. And maybe she was right, because when the first slice was finally made, the sound of the crust giving way and the sight of the steam curling upward felt like a moment worth waiting for. He could taste it now, even in the dream, that same warm sweetness, the spice lingering just long enough to make you want another bite, the butter melting instantly into the soft swirls. But more than the flavor, it was the feeling that stayed with him, the sense that he was safe, that the world was small and whole, and that mornings like this would never run out. The vision faded slowly, not vanishing all at once, but retreating in layers, like mist lifting from a quiet field. He became aware again of the bakery's wooden counter under his fingertips, the rain on the roof, the soft scrape of Mrs. Whitmore's knife as she cut another slice. Yet, the warmth from that memory lingered in his chest, steady and calm, as though the bread had carried a piece of the past forward just for him. He found himself drawn to the wide front window of the bakery, a place where the outside world felt close enough to see, but far enough to stay gentle. The glass was cool when he leaned a little against it, the faint condensation from the rain leaving ghostly shapes that blurred the street beyond. Outside, the village looked softer, as though the drizzle had smudged the edges of every building, every tree, every cobblestone. Even the lamplight, though it was morning, glowed in a subdued, golden haze, bending through the rain like it didn't want to wake anyone too quickly. He took his slice of bread with him, the warmth in his hands making a quiet contrast to the chill seeping in from the glass, and settled into the wooden bench beneath the window, the one polished smooth by years of people sitting just like this, lost in thought. The street was nearly empty, save for the occasional figure hurrying past with an umbrella, their footsteps softened by the wet ground. A horse-drawn cart rolled by slowly, the driver bundled in a long coat, the rhythmic clop of hooves carrying through the mist like a muted heartbeat. Somewhere farther down the lane, the faint jingle of a shop bell could be heard, so delicate that it might have been part of the rain's melody rather than a sound of its own. The world seemed to move at half its usual pace, as though everyone in the village had agreed, without speaking, to take the day in small, measured moments. He tore off a small piece of his bread and let it rest on his tongue, closing his eyes for a moment to better feel the warmth travel through him. It wasn't just food, it was an anchor. The spice and sweetness lingered long after the bite was gone, the flavor settling into a place beyond taste, where memories curled up and made themselves comfortable. He thought of how many mornings must have passed in this bakery just like this one. The rain falling, the ovens humming, people drifting in for warmth and bread before the day truly began. There was a sense of belonging in that thought, not the kind that comes from being known by name, but the quieter kind that comes from being part of a place's rhythm, even if just for a moment. Sitting there, with the soft patter of rain against the window and the taste of warm bread still lingering, he felt a sense of contentment that seemed deeper than the moment itself. It was as if time had thinned, and he was looking through it, seeing not just the morning as it was, but every morning like it that had ever been. In that space between then and now, between memory and presence, he realized that sometimes the smallest places, the quietest mornings, carried the most lasting pieces of life. And as he sat there, half in the present and half in something older, the rain kept falling, steady and sure, as though it had all the time in the world. The small brass bell over the bakery door jingled again, and he glanced up out of habit. At first, it was just another silhouette against the gray outside, a figure stepping in from the drizzle, brushing rain from their shoulders. But then, as the door swung shut and the lamplight fell across the newcomer's face, he felt a flicker of recognition. It was Thomas Whitby, though everyone in the village still called him Tommy, no matter that he had left for the city more than 15 years ago. Time had broadened his shoulders and added a few threads of silver to his hair. But his eyes, warm and steady, were exactly the same as they'd been on the days they'd walked home from school together, kicking stones down the lane. Tommy paused just inside, letting the warmth of the room seep into him. And when his gaze landed on the bench by the window, a slow smile broke across his face. Without a word, he made his way over, his boots leaving faint marks on the wooden floor, still damp from the rain. The years between them seemed to fold up neatly as he sat down beside him, as if they'd simply missed a single afternoon rather than a decade and a half. "Didn't expect to find you here," Tommy said, his voice carrying the same easy tone it always had, the kind that made even strangers feel like old friends. The truth was, neither of them had planned this meeting, and yet, sitting side by side in the warm glow of the bakery with the rain outside, it felt like something that had been meant to happen all along. Mrs. Whitmore looked up from behind the counter, her expression brightening at the sight of him. "Tommy Whitby. Well, if this isn't a surprise," she called out, already reaching for another mug. "You'll be wanting coffee, hot black, and strong, just like always." Tommy chuckled, nodding, the sound blending so naturally with the room's quiet hum that it seemed to belong there. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both gazing out at the softened shapes of the village street. And it struck him that there were some friendships the years couldn't touch, the kind that picked up right where they'd left off, as if no time had passed at all. Outside, the drizzle continued, each drop tapping its own tiny rhythm against the window. Inside, the smell of bread and cinnamon still wrapped around them like an embrace, and their mugs soon steamed between their hands. Tommy began to speak of the years away, the noise and pace of the city, the strange comfort of returning to a place where people still knew your name without needing to ask. As he listened, letting the low, steady voice carry him along, he realized that the rain, the bakery, the quiet company, it all wove together into something rare. This wasn't just a morning in the village. It was a reminder that sometimes life gives you back pieces you thought were gone forever. They sipped their coffee in slow, unhurried gulps, the kind of drinking meant for talking, not rushing. The rain outside thickened, falling in lazy silver chords that blurred the edges of the street and made the world seem smaller, cozier. "Do you remember?" Tommy began, tapping the side of his mug thoughtfully. "That storm we got caught in must have been the summer of '82, when we tried to race home from the orchard." The memory rose up instantly. Two boys on bicycles too small for their growing legs, pedaling hard through sheets of rain, laughing so hard their sides hurt, water dripping from their noses and running into their shoes. "I remember you hit that pothole and nearly went flying," he said, grinning at the thought. Tommy laughed, shaking his head. "And you came back for me, even though you could have been home and dry before the worst of it." The words carried no weight of accusation, only the quiet warmth of old loyalty remembered. Mrs. Whitmore passed their table, setting down a plate with two thick slices of her honey oat bread still steaming. "On the house," she said, giving Tommy's shoulder a gentle pat before moving on. The smell was pure comfort, earthy, sweet, and buttery at the same time. As they tore the bread into pieces, dipping them into their coffee like they used to when they were barely tall enough to see over the bakery counter, the years between then and now seemed impossibly thin. The rain's steady patter outside felt almost identical to that long-ago summer storm, though softer now, gentler, the echo of a memory instead of the wildness of youth. It was funny, he thought, how the mind worked. How a sound, a smell, or the way light slanted through a window could pull you straight back into a moment you thought had faded. The bakery, the rain, and Tommy's easy presence all carried the texture of something he'd known his whole life. And maybe that was why the conversation felt so effortless. No need to fill every silence, no rush to cover every year apart. Some things didn't need explaining. They were simply understood. Outside, the rain whispered on, steady as a heartbeat, as if it too wanted to keep them inside just a little longer. The bakery's clock ticked softly above the doorway, its brass pendulum swaying in a slow, hypnotic rhythm that matched the rain's steady beat. Time seemed to stretch here, not in the impatient way it does when waiting for something, but in that rare, precious way where the present moment feels enough. Tommy leaned back in his chair, hands wrapped around his mug, steam curling into the air between them. "You know," he said after a while, "places like this, they hold on to people's lives, even when the people move on." His eyes drifted toward the far corner of the room, where an old framed photograph hung, the bakery staff from decades ago, all in crisp white aprons, their faces lit with the same warm pride that seemed to fill the place even now. The man followed his gaze, recognizing Mrs. Whitmore's mother in the picture, standing in the middle with a hand on the shoulder of a much younger Mrs. Whitmore. Around them, the counter was stacked with round loaves, jars of preserves, and trays of pastries that looked almost identical to the ones in the glass case today. It was as if time had bent itself into a loop, allowing certain scenes to replay with only small changes. "You're right," he said, smiling faintly. "And maybe that's why I came back. I wanted to see if the loop was still there." Tommy's laugh was soft, but it carried the weight of shared understanding. Outside, the rain shifted, no longer just a gentle patter, but a more insistent drumming on the awning, a reminder that the world beyond the bakery was cooler, wetter, and less forgiving. Yet inside, the warmth only deepened, the air thick with the scent of cinnamon, fresh bread, and coffee. Someone opened the door briefly, letting in a gust of damp air, but the door swung shut again with a reassuring click, sealing them back into their cocoon of familiarity. Tommy broke off another piece of bread and offered it across the table, the gesture simple, but full of that wordless bond they'd always had, the kind that made the years between feel like nothing at all. The rain eased at last, softening to a mist that blurred the view through the front windows, making the pastel houses across the street look like watercolors bleeding gently into the paper. Inside, the last few customers lingered, their conversations hushed, as if reluctant to disturb the stillness that had settled over the room. The man and Tommy sat in easy silence now, each finishing the last sips of their coffee. Mrs. Whitmore moved quietly behind the counter, wiping it down in slow circles, her expression the same mix of pride and peace as the women in that old photograph. When the man finally stood to leave, the bell above the door chimed, and the cool mist kissed his face. He glanced back once, catching a final glimpse of the golden light spilling from the bakery windows, the kind of light that felt less like illumination and more like a memory you could step into. As he walked away down the damp street, he carried with him the scent of bread, the sound of rain, and the certainty that some places never truly let you go. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that the next time the clouds gathered and the world slowed to the rhythm of falling rain, he'd find his way back again. And that's our journey for tonight, friends. If you felt the rain, smelled the bread, and found yourself somewhere back in time, then you've been right here with me, Back Then with Ben. These stories will always be waiting for you. So, when the day feels heavy, or you just need a gentle place to rest, come back and join me again. Until next time, sleep well, dream deep, and keep a little piece of the past close to your heart.